What's up, Whappers, and welcome into a unique ATW edition where I am here in Boston, the glamorous Cambridge Hotel here just outside of Harvard, where I'll be for the next couple of days while you guys are enjoying a 2-hour delay today. Wow, that's got to be pretty cool for you guys, but I also think it's pretty cool that I'm here talking to you like I'm standing in front of the classroom back in DC while I'm here in Boston. But nonetheless, today's topic is truly building upon what we've been progressing towards over the last couple of weeks, which is setting the stage for the notion of how Western Europe, which since the fall of the Roman Empire has certainly been in decline, but yet began to rise and take on a new form of political, economic, and social structure with feudalism. Western Europe, Eastern Europe, going in two different directions thanks to the split of the Roman Empire. But we can't ignore the growing Islamic world in the Middle East, North Africa, and even parts of Western Europe on the Iberian Peninsula with Spain and Portugal. So we are going to sort of merge those three topics today together. And I have some built-in time with class today for you guys to do a little SAP. You're going to work on a SAP today. And, you know, this is experimental. I've never done this before. So let's hope that this we get a lot out of this and it comes around and makes some sense here as a way to get through the material without me being here. So let's get to it. I want to really first begin with the eastern half of the Roman Empire. The Byzantine Empire, as we discussed last week, formed after Emperor Diocletian split Rome, the Roman Empire, in half. And as we discussed in the 300s and 400s, while the western half of the Roman Empire fell into despair and succumbed to those 8 reasons that the empire faded, in the eastern half, the resources, the military, and the political structure no doubt contributed to why the eastern half of the former Roman Empire would prevail for another 1,000 years. If you put it into context based on time, the Byzantine Empire effectively started after the split occurred in the 300s. So we're talking 300s, 400s CE. Now the Byzantine Empire would last all the way to 1453. And how do we know it's that specific? Well, in 1453, Muslims from Central Asia, Muslim nomads from Central Asia, conquered the Byzantine Empire by taking over Istanbul, or taking over Constantinople and renaming it Istanbul, and that would be the Ottoman Empire. We'll get to the Ottoman Empire much later in the year. But for the time being, realize that the eastern half of the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, was thriving as Rome was collapsing. We know that already, but I want to give you some key contextual background information that's going to lead to where we're going with everything here this morning or this afternoon for you guys. So first and foremost, a key name. If you're going to find one emperor of the Byzantine Empire to be accountable for, it was an emperor who ruled in the 500s. So pretty early on in terms of the Byzantine history. And his name was Emperor Justinian, or Justin for short. But Justinian was an emperor in the 500s. And Justinian is probably one of the most important names to associate with the Byzantine Empire. Justinian's accomplishments range from the following. You're dealing with an emperor who tried to fashion himself much like the old Roman emperors. He was an absolute ruler. There was no challenging his authority whatsoever. So that's one characteristic to be aware of with Justinian. But you also have with Justinian this idea that although the Roman Empire had fallen by the time he came to power, Justinian truly tried to embrace and even grow Western European culture within his empire. Justinian conquered parts of Italy, modern-day Italy, and brought the old Roman Empire into the East. But maybe his most significant contribution is creating a legal system for the Byzantine Empire that was based on Rome's legal system. The Roman Empire's legal system was known as the 12 Tables. Emperor Justinian fashioned his own legal system known as Justinian's Code, or the Justinian Code. And the Justinian Code was a universal law code that spread throughout the Byzantine Empire. Let's not forget, as we look at maps of the Byzantine Empire, we're talking about an empire that carved into parts of Western, Eastern Europe, the Middle East. This is an expansive empire. So the Byzantine Empire would be unified under this code of law from Emperor Justinian. And speaking of law, and speaking of rule, one of Justinian's most important developments was placing himself at the top of the Byzantine Empire's religious Christianity. The Eastern religion within the old Roman Empire of the Byzantines was slightly different than Roman Catholicism, mainly because under the Byzantine Empire's rule, the importance of the Pope was not as pervasive as it was under the Roman Empire in Western Europe. The Pope was still an important figure to the Eastern Byzantines. However, Justinian and other Byzantine emperors tended, that's the key word there, they tended to place themselves as the head of the Byzantine Empire, as well as the head of the Eastern Christianity Church. This is a term that appears a lot on basis pre-comps, comprehensive exams, and possibly even could be used on an AP exam. You'll see it on the screen here. But the term is called Caesaropapism. Caesaropapism. And that's a term to associate with the idea that the religious leader is also the head of the government. Now this leads me to a very important vocabulary lesson. Whenever you have religion and government and you bring them together, you marry them together, you have a term which is known as non-secular. Non-secular. Non-secular means that together the religion and the church and the government go hand in hand. They work together. And in this case, in the Byzantine Empire, it became tradition that the emperor was not only the head of the government, but also the head of the church. Justinian is a good example of this Caesaropapism. Now, the opposite of non-secular would be secular. Secular means religion, government are separate. They may be different even in terms of the weight of the importance, but church and state do not mix. Church and state do not mix. So secular versus non-secular are vocabulary terms that we're going to embrace quite extensively this year. And you guys should all be very well aware of the difference between secular and non-secular. So one more time. Secular means that church and state are not together. Non-secular means that church and state are married. They're joined to the hip. And Caesaropapism, which was a theme of the Byzantine Empire, definitely was part of the association with that empire. Now back to our guy Justinian, who's the quintessential, perhaps, early Byzantine emperor. During Justinian's rule, a major plague of mostly malaria spread throughout the Byzantine Empire. It's estimated that somewhere between 30 and 40% of the Byzantine Empire perished during this devastating plague. Now, this is the first time all year that we're talking about disease spread, which is something that I spend a lot of time on later in the year. And when we're looking at the spread of diseases, here's another vocabulary opportunity for everyone. When you have a local disease that's in one specific area, we call that an epidemic. But when you have a disease that spreads out over a large chunk of territory across many regions, we're talking about a pandemic. The Justinian plague, as this spread of malaria and other diseases is often referred to, the Justinian plague is a great example of a pandemic, something that spread over a wide number of regions. And if those numbers are in fact accurate, we're talking hundreds of thousands and millions of people who perished as a result of this brutal plague that struck the Byzantine Empire in the 500s CE. PSF time. Past shapes the future. The Byzantine Justinian plague would be a precursor to other pandemics that struck Europe, such as the Black Death, that hit Europe extremely hard in the 1300s. And we will definitely be covering the effects of that disease, as well as others later in the year. So it is important that everyone understands that effectively we're dealing with an empire that was ravaged by a disease, meaning that no matter how many people, no matter how many lands you conquer, Mother Nature typically prevailed in terms of, at this time in history, when you have primitive medicine and you have peoples who know very little about diseases and germs. This was, at the time, the worst, most devastating plague ever in the history of humankind. And it would only be replaced in terms of its devastation until the Black Death. So if you're into the study of diseases, pathology, and whatnot, then you would definitely want to look up the Justinian plague. But the Byzantine Empire is here to stay, guys. 1,000 years. 1,000 years this empire is going to be a powerhouse in Eastern and some parts of Western Europe. But that brings me to our next topic. How do we sort of bring things back to Western Europe? And how do we sort of tie these things together? Because it does seem interesting that you have this dominant empire in the East and a decentralized, fragmented Western Europe, although under Charlemagne, for one point at least, Western Europe was definitely united under the Holy Roman Empire and Charlemagne's rule. But more significant to the Eastern and Western European history is the idea that in 1054, and that's a specific year, the Eastern and Western Roman Empire broke or divorced or split, however you want to call it, over the matter of Christianity. Since the onset of Christianity's spread in the Roman Empire, including to the Byzantine Empire, both Western Europe and the Eastern Europe began to evolve on a slightly different path. In Eastern Europe, for example, language was slightly different. Many Eastern European countries today have a Greek-based alphabet compared to a Latin-based alphabet because under the Byzantine rulers, Greek was the preferred language, whereas in Western Europe, like with Charlemagne, for example, Latin was the preferred base of language. But where West and Eastern Europe most significantly differed was in terms of religion. And in 1054, the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Christian Church, which was also known as the Eastern Orthodox Church, began to have irreconcilable differences over matters such as the power of the Pope, over matters such as icons, over matters such as the Bible and language. Both sides could not see eye to eye, and their cultures and the differences within their cultures was so significant that the churches went through what is known as the Great Schism. schism, which is a really solid vocab word for split, like a severe split. Some of the differences between the Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic Church are very nuanced, such as how certain sacraments and how much power the Catholic Church and the priests and the bishops and popes and whatnot could all possess. You don't need to be aware of those for this class. But what you do need to be aware of is how cataclysmically important this schism was in terms of shaping the future history of Europe. Now, keep in mind the year, 1054, because that's about 40 years before another event we're going to talk about today, which are the Crusades. And with the split of the Catholic and Orthodox Church into two, no longer is Western and Eastern Europe united any longer with a common cultural bond. We're talking now about the fact that Western and Eastern Europe are split up over one of the most central issues, which is religion. In many ways, this is common. Most religions have differing schools of thought and differing sects and differing groups. For example, we've already learned that with Islam you had both Sunni and Shia. And so when you consider the fact that there's this major split up of the Catholic and Orthodox Church, effectively we're dealing with a situation, and this is PSF, that within Eastern and Western Europe today, you have incredible division over the fact that many Eastern European countries today are predominantly Orthodox Christian churches. There isn't as much Roman Catholicism in Eastern Europe, whereas in Western Europe, the vast majority of the people are, in fact, Catholic. So the Great Schism creates a furthering separation of the Byzantine Empire and Western Europe, which at this point, Western Europe was still, as we discussed last week, mired in the spread of feudalism. But where the Byzantine Empire and the Roman Catholic Church did have some type of agreements, they did have some type of commonality, was their arch rival in the world, and that would be Islam. And so, what we're going to do right now, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of time to regroup. It's about 18 minutes of me rambling on, droning on. But I am going to now give you guys a 2-minute break. And so during the 2-minute break, I will throw up some type of entertainment. But I do ask that when I return from the 2-minute break that we're ready to go. So enjoy your break, and here we go. All right, everyone, welcome back. And let's get down to business once more, because we're here to talk about how, although the Roman Catholic Church and Orthodox Church split, and although the Byzantine Empire and Western Europe were quite divergent in terms of their lifestyles, in terms of their government structures, in terms of their leadership, in terms of their religion, even, where the Roman Catholic, Western European influenced kingdoms and the Byzantine Empire did share a common enemy, was Islam. And by the 1000s, Islam was a growing powerhouse in the Middle East, North Africa, and even parts of Western Europe with Spain. The Umayyad dynasty, or the Umayyad Caliphate, had been ultra successful in spreading Islam from Muhammad's original territory of Arabia. However, when Islam spread from Arabia to other parts of the world, no matter where it interacted, Christianity and Islam began to become directly in conflict with one another. But the whole root of the ultimate conflict at this point in world history between Christianity and Islam really stems from their shared history. We talked about this before, and it was a surprise to many of you, how Christianity and Islam shared many of the same original beliefs. One of those beliefs is that Jerusalem is one of the holiest cities to both religions, including, as well as Christianity and Islam. Jerusalem is also a holy city to people who follow Judaism, aka Jewish people. So our three major monotheistic religions all somehow subscribe to the idea that Jerusalem is a holy city. However, with the spread of Islam, Jerusalem's status as a Christian-controlled city hung in the balance as Islam began to spread further and further throughout the Middle East, North Africa, as well as Central Asia. And ultimately, Muslim rulers began to capture and take over almost the vast majority of the Middle East. Now, important vocabulary word for you guys to incorporate here into your lexicon. I know we have a bunch of those today. But the word here is Dar-al-Islam. You'll see it on the board, Dar-al-Islam. Dar-al-Islam relates to any region where Islam is ingrained, where Islam is a part of the ruling structure of a territory. So when we're talking about an Islamic caliphate, when we're talking about Islam even today, like Iran, for example, or a country where Islam is the official religion, like in Saudi Arabia, Dar-al-Islam relates to the idea that Islam is not only the official religion, but also that Islam is ingrained into the territory of the people and ingrained in the lives of the people that live in those territories. Dar-al-Islam is a word that does not appear in the Quran, but it is an area or a part of the world where Islamic law, Islamic culture, Islamic customs prevail. So the Middle East and North Africa, as well as the Iberian Peninsula around the 1000 CE, are in the wheelhouse of that is quintessential Dar-al-Islam. And that's just a term, again, to describe the spread of Islam and how Islam became the official religion in those territories. It does not relate to a specific dynasty or caliphate, like, for example, the Umayyad dynasty and caliphate, which took over almost all of North Africa as well as the Iberian Peninsula. So Dar-al-Islam is just a term to describe how Islam spread into a variety of areas and how Islam is the official religion in those territories. Whereas we're going to learn about today some specific caliphates or empires. So the one we've already learned about is the Umayyad. But now we're going to talk about a couple more groups, one of which, and this will all tie back to Jerusalem here momentarily, so stay with me, please. So The Umayyad dynasty collapsed sometime in the 800s CE, and that eventually led to the rise of two other Islamic caliphates. One are called the Abbasid Caliphate. The Abbasid Caliphate would rule somewhere around the end of the 700s, all the way up to about the 1200s in different parts of North Africa and the Middle East, as well as parts of the Iberian Peninsula. So this is a good example of Dar-al-Islam. Dar-al-Islam relating to the Abbasid Caliphate. Now, under the Abbasid rule, one thing that is always associated with the Abbasids is an increase of culture, especially Islamic Arabian culture. You have some of the great cultural developments in world history emerge with the Abbasids. Literature, mathematics, especially like algebra, for example, were invented by Abbasid thinkers. The Abbasid period is sometimes referred to as a golden age of Islam. This is when Islam was so firmly entrenched in their Dar-al-Islam territories that ultimately Islam is now here to stay. There is no repelling Islam. Islam was going to be a permanent fixture in various parts of the world, especially North Africa and the Middle East. So any Christian or Jewish person who had ideas that Islam was going to fade away were simply mistaken, because the Abbasids created a golden age of Islam, which the Abbasids ruled extensively, but not without company. And one of the more fascinating aspects of Dar-al-Islam, those regions of the world where Islamic law and government prevail, is that you have multiple groups that claim rule as the official Islamic caliphate. And while the Abbasid dynasty or Abbasid caliphate lasted a good 500 years, almost to the 1200s, another important caliphate that emerged was a caliphate that formed in the Middle East by a group of Turks that came from Central Asia. And this will be not the first time, this is the first time, but not the last time we referred to a group of Turks having a great impact on world history. And the specific group of the Turks that we're going to talk about, and this all ties in everything we've done up to so far today, are the Seljuk Turks. Seljuk Turks. The Seljuk Turks began to rule over various parts of the Middle East, especially parts of Egypt as well, around the 1000s CE. That was really like the beginning of their height. And the Seljuk Turks challenged the Abbasids. They took some territories away from the Abbasid Caliphate. So even though they're both Islamic caliphates, they also effectively were rivals at the same time, leading to an interesting dynamic that kind of in a way parallels the Byzantine Empire and the Western Empire of the former Roman Empire. But, I'm sorry, Western Europe, not Western Empire, my bad. Anyways, where's this all leading up to? Well, the Seljuk Turks, when they came into the Middle East, captured and took over the city of Jerusalem, this great holy city that I had mentioned before. Well, this throws Christians into an absolute tizzy. Christians and Jewish begin to be persecuted in Jerusalem. And there's great tension between Muslims and Christians and Jewish living there. And so this warranted a great response within the Western Europe, and as well as the Eastern Byzantine Empire, and the respective Christian leadership groups. You've got the Pope with Western Europe, overseeing most of Western Europe, and then you've got the Byzantine Empire with their Caesaropapism. What ultimately is reconciled out of this growing influence of Dar-al-Islam all over the Middle East, especially the Seljuk Turks and the Abbasids in various parts of the Middle East and North Africa, we are set for a showdown, an epic showdown between Christians and Muslims, with Jewish people caught in between, sadly. But Christians and Muslims will go to war for about 3 to 4 centuries, on and off, over control of various territories in the Middle East, but most importantly, Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the holy city that both religions truly coveted. And ultimately, what we have here is this incredible I mean, in just absolutely incredible bloodbath that lasts for 300, 400 years, give or take. And what we're going to be really focusing on here as our class starts to wind down is an activity where I'm going to give you guys up here on the board a document of an excerpt of the Pope who ordered the first Christian armies to cross over into the Middle East in an attempt to try to capture the city of Jerusalem back from the Seljuk Turks. And this this Pope's name is Pope Urban II. So you're going to read this document as it's up here on the board. We're going to time this out for about 8 minutes. That should take you guys all the way down to almost about 10 minutes remaining in class. And I want you to read and then do a SAP in your notebook on Pope Urban II's sort of declaration of war. It's a speech that he gave in France in 1096. And this speech ignited the first of what would become a series of Crusades. So here we are. We're at the Crusades. We're at this pivotal moment in world history. So I'm going to leave you guys to it for the next 8 minutes. You have work to be done on the SAP, and so you'll hear from me again in 8 minutes. Well, that's time. That's time on the SAP. So hopefully that went well. We're about to wrap things up, and you guys will have a few minutes at the end here to, I think, to wind down, pack up. The Crusades, and I'm not going to go into much detail about the battles because it's certainly not a focal point of AP World History, but the Crusades were easily one of the most jarring moments in world history to date. There had never been anything like the Crusades, and some historians even would call the Crusades one of the first world wars because they brought various regions of the world together in conflict. All told, like as I mentioned, there were a series of Crusades that lasted 300-400 years, and these were bloodbaths. Just the epic carnage came about. There are numerous stories of atrocities committed by both sides, and hopefully, you get a sense of why that is, concerning what Pope Urban had to say about justifying the Crusades here. But what I'm going to do right now is effectively I'm going to cut you guys loose in a minute, and I'm going to have you guys partner up with somebody. Just grab a person next to you, and for my colleague who's subbing, just make sure everyone kind of gets the job done here. But more or less, I just want you guys to compare your SAPs. You're going to be getting your SAP quizzes from last week back on Wednesday, and I would say just this: be very careful what you see about situation and point of view. We did a poor job with situation and point of view. We did not really identify the big picture here with situation, and point of view was not really going into the speaker's background, what's influencing them to believe what they believe in. And so I'm just going to have for the rest of the class, you compare your notes on SAP, and then tomorrow I'll put some more effort into the video about the Crusades, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about the aftermath and what the Crusades meant for the world. And then that's going to actually bring us into our next topic, which is major trade routes. I'm going to take the opportunity because one of the things about the Crusades was it opened up trade between Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East and North Africa. So that brought everybody kind of together in a strange, sort of ironic way, despite the fact that these were epically bloody wars. But for the rest of the class, you guys just have to compare your SAPs. And again, work hard on this, take the time. And as far as homework is concerned, there's nothing to do. So I'll see you guys back on the video for Tuesday in class. And as far as everything else goes, I'll remind you, as always, the past shapes the future. Good luck on your SAP swappers, and have a great rest of your Monday.